Hello, my name's Gavin. This is Genre Books, and this is me trying to deliver on one of my aims for 2025. When I started this booktube channel, what I wanted to do was a deep dive into Planet Stories. In 2024, I only managed 7 issues, so I will try to pick up the pace. And here we are, volume number 1, issue 8, the autumn of 1941. So this is the penultimate issue of Planet Stories before the USA belatedly decides to get its war on. I do not talk about comics very much on this channel, and in general that's going to continue. But for the next 5 minutes, that rule is suspended. I'm doing that because the cover of today's issue of Planet Story features a depiction of events in the main story of the issue, which is by Iando Binder, Vassals of the Master World. Iando Binder, at this point, is Otto Binder. Iando Binder is a composite name of Earl and Otto Binder. It might be Binder, I'm not sure. I'm going with Binder. The writing partnership had pretty much dissolved by 1936. Anything after 36, under the name of Iando Binder, is basically Otto by himself. And he's big in comics. But I want to talk about that in a moment. I want to talk about Fiction House and their foray into comics. Fiction House started in the 1920s with pulp magazines, and it's an economic decision that paid off. There are a number, probably close to 20 titles they are publishing. When we get to 1932, the effects of the Great Depression are telling. 12 of the titles shut down or are shelved. Some come back, some don't. As the 1930s progress, pulp sales continue to decline, and Fiction House decides to diversify into the production of comic books. A driver for this is a successful sales pitch to Fiction House from Will Eisner and Jerry Iger. Jerry Iger is the great uncle of Bob Iger of the Disney Corporation fame. Will Eisner is the creator of The Spirit, amongst many other comic luminary characters. And the Eisner and Iger team create Jumbo Comics for Fiction House. This is an important comic. Not important because it's the first comic produced by Fiction House, but important because it has the first comic stories by Jack Kirby. All 3 of them are under pseudonym, but we have The Diary of Dr. Hayward, which is a science fiction story. We have the first part of a serialization of The Count of Monte Cristo, and we have a Western detective comic strip, Wilton of the West. Jumbo Comics number 1 also introduces Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, as a brand new character and probably the most famous of the Fiction House characters produced. She has a spin-off of 18 comics of her own and turns up in various places. Fiction House also produces a number of other titles, some of which are partnered with their pulp counterparts. So we have Wings Comics for the aviation side of things, Fight Comics, Planet Comics, obviously to go alongside Planet Stories. But it also produces, there's a short run of Will Eisner's The Spirit, I think 5 issues there. And they do quite well, and until they don't. But Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, is their greatest success by sales, and Fiction House is not so silly not to exploit that and produce a number of other characters similar in some respects to Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. So Anne Mason, she is the partner of Fiction House's Tarzan clone. We have Camilla, the wild girl of the Congo, Princess Taj, Tiger Girl, Princess Vishnu, and Phantomar. These are strong, capable, competent, hyper-competent female characters who don't need rescuing, know how to handle themselves, and can handle weapons. So female depiction in Fiction House's comics output is markedly different to their depiction in the pulp arena. However, such relative positive role modelling goes over the heads of some. Dr. Frederick Werfer, in his book Seduction of the Innocent, which became very popular in government circles, was blind to all the hyper-competency displayed by the female characters and was instead worried that people like Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, were just showing a little too much leg whilst they perform their heroics. The US Senate Subcommittee on Juvenile Delinquency agreed with this sentiment. So comic books were blamed for all of society's ills in the same way that previously dime novels and penny dreadfuls had been blamed, pulp magazines had been blamed, Hollywood, in the same way that after the comics scare, rock and roll music would be blamed, heavy metal music would be blamed, rap music would be blamed, video nasties and video games would be blamed, and continuing to the present day with social media and TikTok. Regardless, all of this had an impact on Fiction House, on their sales, on the changes that they had to make. I don't want to blame it all on this. There are plenty of other reasons. The rise of television, the rise of paperback books, all of which ate into the core demographic that Fiction House was aiming at. But this was all taking place in 1954 with this wonderful subcommittee. And by 1955, Fiction House is defunct. Let's not get downhearted talking about that. Let's talk about Otto Binder and his contribution to comics. He actually starts working in the 1930s for Otis Adelbert Klein, who I've spoken about before, and was involved in marketing the stories of Robert E. Howard. Moving to comics, he works for Fawcett Comics and works on characters like Captain Venture, Bullet Man, El Kareem. During a stint at Timely Comics, he works on stories from about Captain America, the Human Torch, and the Submariner. He ends up on the DC side as well. He is the co-creator of Supergirl and Crypto, the Wonder Dog. We owe to him the invention of Bizarro World and the Phantom Zone. He works on stories from Captain Marvel, the original Captain Marvel, and created Mary Marvel and wrote a lot about the Marvel family. He also co-created Black Adam and the Legion of Superheroes. So there is enough there which still is used by the comic firms to this day. It's a Black Adam film not so long ago, and I saw Crypto the Wonder Dog in the trailer for the new Superman film, because it's been 18 months since we last rebooted that franchise. However, before he was working on comics and after he was working on comics, Otto Binder was writing science fiction, and the main story in issue 8 of Planet Stories is Yando Binder, the Masters of the Vassal World. America's official neutrality has actually been sort of brought up obliquely in stories that I've read in Planet Stories up until now. There are depictions of unnamed authoritarian regimes, which are obviously Germany, and not in complimentary terms. Here, and it only lasts a paragraph, but it's problematic. Binder puts a alternative future when aliens have invaded, that Germany stops fighting its wars in Europe and decides to turn and fight the alien invaders instead, and talks about the bravery of the German army and the leadership of Hitler. This is, charitably, you can call it an ambivalent portrayal, but it is not the kind of thing we are going to see in Planet Stories or in mainstream media ever again. At least until 2016, perhaps. Vassals of the Master World is a fairly run-of-the-mill story of alien invasion, but it is on a sort of galactic scale which we haven't really seen a lot of in Planet Stories. This is about a galactic empire that spans most of the known galaxy, and we focus on the son of the first person to encounter the aliens on Earth, who joins a rebel alliance and launches an attack on their heavily fortified mechanized base with a small group of fighter craft, in something very reminiscent of the attack on the Death Star. And I don't think it's much of a spoiler to say that they do succeed. Not without military reverses beforehand, but they do succeed by exploiting a design flaw in this sort of battle station that they are attacking. I would be surprised if George Lucas hadn't found a copy of this issue of Planet Stories lying around at some point. It's not the greatest story. It's not the greatest Yando Binder story that I've read, not by a margin. However, it's the main story here. It's the cover story. It's novella-sized. And I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's not their best. In comparison, certainly in length, is Wilbur S. Peacock's The Victory of Klon. This is about an expedition to Venus, which turns out to be very short-lived due to Klon, and Klon wanting to rise to prominence within his own people. This backfires spectacularly, and whilst everyone's initially very impressed with Klon, it's a remarkably short-lived success. This is a very short story. It's a couple of bits of misdirection in there which are quite amusing, but wrapped up very quickly. Next up we have Henry Haas and the Star of Satan. This is only his second contribution to Planet Stories, but he is a name that does crop up multiple times, especially in these first few years. And in the autumn of 1941, he's possibly in a little bit of a purple patch, and he's also just had published, or just about to have published, probably the story he's most famous for. But this story is not published in Planet Stories, and it's not really famous because of Henry Haas, truth be told. He co-wrote with Ray Bradbury Pendulum, which is Ray Bradbury's first professionally published story, which appears in Super Science Stories in November of 1941. Bad news for Henry Haas that he's not the main character in that story, but good news for us that Ray Bradbury is now going to be on the scene writing pulp science fiction. Back to this story. Here our hero is Hype Garth, who is someone who has been banished to an asteroid belt. This is an alternative to prison. He can't return to Earth. He wants to get back to Chicago, but it is unlikely. You can, by prospecting in the asteroid belt, gather enough riches to pay your way out, but the sentence he has received, and I can't remember what the crime he's supposed to have committed was, is so great that he's not really going to be able to pay that off. However, there is possible salvation. A business mogul has crash landed somewhere in the asteroid belt, and they've just received a signal, which means that someone is still alive. So they go, he and his, I want to say cellmate, it's the equivalent of a cellmate, go to try rescue that person in the hope that it might be this business mogul. They follow the signal and start getting shot at. They think perhaps the businessman has got lucky and crash landed into a massive gold deposit, especially as when they get closer they can hear the voice saying, no, they can't have it, it's mine, it's all mine. He hasn't crashed into a gold deposit. The truth is a lot more grisly, and probably more grisly than I was thinking I was going to find, even in a pulp magazine, but one that's maybe aimed more at the juvenile market. But yeah, it's pretty gruesome, even though it's only hinted at. Dead Man's Planet is the next story, and it's from R.R. Winterbottom, who I'm finding just never disappoints. This is okay, I'll admit it, there is the names of our science fiction heroes are lacking a little bit. Mick and Alf. This is another asteroid based tale, this time an asteroid between Mars and Jupiter, where Mick and Alf, experiencing engine trouble, have decided to land their ship on this asteroid and see what they can do to fix it. When they get there, they see what looks, to all intents and purposes, like a field of corn, as they might find on Earth. They take a closer look and find a human habitation, but no human inhabiting there. There is the frozen remains of someone, but they're long dead. But they do meet Goal. Goal claims to be this dead person's son. Something's not quite right, and the story here is whether Mick and Alf can trust this person that they've found. It is a short story, but the idea, the premise is great, and the imagination that goes with it is good, and the writing from Winterbottom seems to be consistently of a superior standard to a lot that you get in the pulps. However, the next story is from Raymond Z. Galoon, who is no slouch himself, and someone who I'm also enjoying the more that I read from him. This is The Invaders of Saturn's Ring, and involves another alien invasion. This time it is the aliens from Callisto have invaded the colonies on Titan, and these colonists on Titan look to be all of sort of Scandinavian extraction, or I'm guessing that given the names that they've all got. Possibly there is a parallel here of the Scandinavian area being invaded by sort of brutal authoritarian regime looking over at Europe at that time. But our hero is resolved to save the day, and does so in an extraordinary way. I think this might be the first science fiction story I've read where farming knowledge is the saviour of the day. Perhaps the story is a little bit too derivative of War of the Worlds, but if you're going to be derivative of a science fiction story, that's a good one to choose. The next story is South to Propontis by Henry Andrew Ackerman. According to Goodreads, I was the only Goodreads user on planet Earth to read South of Propontis last year. I'm hoping someone else read it as well and just didn't log it on Goodreads. It's not a bad story. It's a transplanted Western. This is a farmer or a farmer's lad on Mars who has never been to Earth, is going to visit Earth, but they are attacked by outlaws. The outlaws kidnap him and take him away, but they are in turn ambushed by Martians who want someone to fix their machine. I can't remember what the machine is supposed to do. I don't really think it's important. The outlaws try at spear point, fail to fix the machine, and are sacrificed in a fairly grisly manner. Our hero, Don, this farmer's lad, is next up. And if in the last story we're saved by some farming knowledge, here Don is saved with his knowledge of a science experiment. So possibly not super science saving the day, rather classroom science saving the day, but it's quite fun. Spawn of the Venus Sea by Henry Walton takes place on the oceans of Venus on board a steamship. This could well be another transplanted story. This could be an ocean anywhere that involves a sea monster, but it involves sea monsters who are picking off the crew of the ship one by one, and our hero, who is the unpopular third mate of the ship, saving the day. Again, science saves the day because these monsters look like they might be transdimensional and are attacking from all sorts of directions at a moment's notice. They can't be fought conventionally, and there has to be a scientific solution to the issue. This is, I think, possibly one of the weaker stories in this issue. It's a little bit too nautical to be sort of planetary science fiction. It may have sort of stood better on its merits somewhere else. The final story is Shadrach from Nelson S. Bond, which is the science fiction retelling of a Bible story. It's pretty shameless in displaying where it comes from. It's called Shadrach, and the character remembers the story of Shadrach, and it saves him and his companions. But yeah, it's really well done. Nelson S. Bond is another name that I am now looking forward to when I see it in Planet Stories, as long as it's not attached to a poem. And finally, we have the letters pages, which, in fairness to Planet Stories and to Fiction House, continue to print stories from people who have gripes. And in fairness to science fiction fans, continue to supply no end of griping. Praisers and detractors alike feel they have to write in to rank the stories from their most to least favourites, and pass judgment on all of the artwork therein, and tell the editors exactly where they are going wrong. We also have another letter from a certain Isaac Asimov, who is writing long, odd letters to the magazine when he should be finishing his Master of Arts. But he does sign off the letter saying, "Anyway, as soon as May's over and I get my MA," a chorus of Columbia professors say, "Oh yeah? I'll really start writing. At least until the army grabs me. We need someone to stop Hitler." So we end the magazine on a much more unequivocal note about Germany than when we had started. And I would imagine in the next few episodes we're really going to see that ramp up. I think possibly with some editorial in the next one or next but one issue. And then I would think, hopefully, seeing it in some of the stories that are coming by the time we're looking at spring and summer of 1942. It depends how quickly people were able to turn these stories round, and it depends how much Planet Stories is relying on its slush pile at this point. But we'll find out soon, I hope, because I intend to maintain a bit more of a tempo in the production of the Planet Stories deep dive videos in 2025. It's still only a few weeks into January. Let's see how well I can keep that promise. But until next time, bye.